I noticed within our federal marketplace, and it happens with every administration, but it's been a one-way dialogue between what's being proposed and everyone else, either in the federal government or the private sector. There's not been a lot of debate. There hasn't been a lot of discussion. There has been a lot of direction. I could care less about the direction. It was the lack of evidence that some were using in order to push forth certain initiatives. One of those was affecting a program that I hold very close and dear to my heart within NASA's program, as they were considering shuttering that program completely. But it has been a strange condition that frustrated me. So rather than being force-fed one narrative, I like to mix things up a little bit. I like to have debates. Originally, this was called a fight night. I wanted to get people together so we could have a good argument, a good fight over these proposals that are coming out that are really affecting government, business between government and industry, certainly industry as well. So it's just to mix up the dialogue a bit. It's to create a debate. We don't hear them often, especially in procurement. And debate is essential, especially when you're in the positions that the two of you found yourself in at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. These are debates that when I was in government, we would have internally all the time on whether something was the right course of action or how we would most efficiently or effectively execute that course of action. Didn't matter the administration. The only reason why we agree to do this, number one, do we leave more informed than we arrived? Number two, are we having fun? And number three, are we being entertained as we're being informed? And so that's my personal goal for every single one of these, is to inform, have fun, and entertain without being over the top. Although I did have walk-up songs for every single one of these gentlemen. So, all right, so that sets the stage, and that's a huge thank you. Welcome to the Exchange. My name is John Johnson. I'm the founder of the Exchange. Before we get into the conversation, let's introduce who I'm sitting here with. I couldn't be more pleased. This doesn't happen often. When was the last time Robert Burton, former acting administrator of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, and my friend Joe Jordan, the Honorable Joe Jordan, appointed Office of Federal Procurement Policy. I don't think you guys don't get together. The OFPP.
Not enough. Not enough.
No, at all. Okay, I think I'm gonna. Today is step one in changing that, and there's a reason why. I was doing some research over the last year, and I wrote a piece on the history of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and the Office of Management and Budget. And your history is fascinating. The short history is this: OMB never existed prior to July 1st, 1970. Before that, there was simply in government it was called the Bureau of Budgets. And the Bureau of Budgets was what was the structure that the administrative state pushed forth, the executive branch in particular, used in order to interact between the executive branch and the legislative branch when it came to budgets. It was under the late 60s, mid 60s, and early Nixon administration where they decided, meaning both parties, decided that they needed a different structure in place to better manage and not control, but to have better oversight over the functions of the executive branch. And so in 1970, they established OMB. And then later, I think it was 1974, was it 1974, where they created the Office of Federal Procurement Policy as a way to help bring together what was a very dispersed function at one point in time, right? And it's not even the procurement rules that were at play, but also the management functions and the operation functions were all over the place with that. As we begin, first of all, tell us what you've been doing, and then talk a little bit about your experiences at OMB and OFPP before we get into what I really wanted to talk about, which were two concepts around enterprise government and commodity IT. But why don't we start?
Sure.
Start that way, Joe.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. So, Joe Jordan, I'm the CEO of a consulting firm called Actuparo, and we work with businesses, usually at the intersection of technology and government. Could be government contractors looking to improve operations or grow within the federal ecosystem. Could be just commercial companies who are saying, hey, maybe there's an opportunity for me to sell to the government, get in the federal supply chain. Before that, I had a non-traditional path to government. I was a consultant at McKinsey, followed a client into the Obama administration, to the Small Business Administration. I just felt like a cool time to serve. She said, come down, run the government contracting and business development programs, which were under a microscope, as they are now again, and kind of help rid those of fraud, waste, and abuse and improve the efficacy so the benefits of those great programs flow to the intended recipients. I lived in Boston. She's like, come down for a year and a half, 2 years, and then you can go back north. So my wife and I moved down. I loved it. I love unsexy problems where if you make a small improvement, the dollars are so large, it's a big impact. So I worked at SBA for a while, and then we had my son, who my friend in the audience and I were just talking about, is now a freshman in high school. So he was born when I was at SBA. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go back to the private sector. And that's when the White House said, well, wait a minute. My predecessor, Dan Gordon, who I'd worked with when I was at SBA and he was at OFPP, was retiring and going into academia. Would you want to come replace him? And so I was like, gosh, I really think that office is cool. I'd met a bunch of the career leadership and civil servants who run that office, and it's a small but mighty force. And I said, all right, that's one of the few things that would get me to stay. So went through the Senate confirmation process. And one fun fact when you were talking about the history of the office that I learned then was every OFPP administrator at that point, from the founding of the office till now, it was still alive. So I took it as, if I'm not going to exercise and eat well, maybe I'll just get the good longevity luck from having been OFPP administrator. So I did that. And then we had our second kid, so that's when it was my 2-year adventure in D.C. had turned into about 6 years at that point. And so I moved back to the private sector and have been doing that ever since. But I think when you're talking about these discussions and whether they're getting folks from former policy-making leadership roles together, getting the community together for true engagement, I do agree completely with your statement. There's just not enough of that. I'm happy that we're not doing fight night. I think next to you two gentlemen, I'd last even less than the 17 seconds Gina Carano made it against Ronda Rousey the other night. Any UFC
I like your
fans
chances
watching?
more than that, Joe. I think you'd mop the floor with.
But no, but it's a lot of fun, and I also just completely agree and buy into. There's a lot of change going on right now. I understand the desire to just move quickly and ask forgiveness later instead of the policy-making process as traditionally done, which does take a lot of time. But I also think some discussion, feedback, blind spot identification that come up through a regulatory back and forth with industry and within the government community is a little bit missing right now. And so I'm one of those people who sent John a text or an email here or there when I'd watch these conversations saying, good job, we need to be having these. And he said, all right, cool, you're coming to the next one. So thank you for having me, and that's what brought me here today.
John, thank you. Thank you for having me. My background is very different than Joe's. I actually grew up in the federal government. I was in the government for 30 years. I've had several lifetimes. And I was an attorney with the Department of Defense, otherwise known as the Department of War, for an extended period of time. Then I went to OMB, out of a legal role into a policy role, which I was hesitant to do, but best move I ever made, right? So during the George W. Bush administration, I was the deputy and off and on the acting administrator, and basically ended up serving longer as the acting than any Senate confirmed administrator during the Bush administration. Interestingly enough, there are not that many OFPP administrators if you really look at who's around, and they didn't serve for that long. And as a matter of fact, the Biden administration had no OFPP administrator, right? The last OFPP administrator was Mike Wooten from the first Trump administration, and he came in towards the end for maybe 18 months. So now you have Dr. Kevin Rhodes, who's a Senate-confirmed appointee under the second Trump administration. Who knows how long he will be there? Bottom line is administrators don't last long. I think Steve Kellman, if you go way back, may have made it 4 years. So I was in that office for almost the entire Bush administration, almost 8 years. And then I've been doing this law firm thing, another life. I'm now with Crowell Moring Law Firm, which is the largest government contracts law firm in the United States. And I've been doing the law firm thing for 17 years. So those who can add in the room can quickly figure out, whoa, you've been around a long time. And so I tell you, just to pick up on what Joe was saying about OMB, it is a fascinating place to work, and it was clearly the highlight of my career by far, because that Office of Federal Procurement Policy, which you're right, is now 52 years old, is an enormously influential office if you want it to be. So when I first went over that, I thought maybe I should read the OFPP Act and see what Congress had in mind for this thing, because I really didn't know what it did. And it's very powerful if you actually look at what you can do, what that statute, the power of the statute gives that office. It's incredible. And I always thought the Department of Defense was the place to be, right? The Department of Defense? I mean, why would you want to be anywhere but the Department of Defense? And so when I left the Department of Defense to go to OMB, this high-level political appointee sat down with me and said, you grew up almost 20 years, right, in the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense thinks they run the federal government. Let me tell you, we run the federal government here at OMB. There are 500 people. We run the federal government, not the Department of Defense. So all that DOD stuff, just get that out of your mind. And I thought, yeah, right. But boy, he was right. He was right. I mean, they really do run the federal government. However, I don't think the Department of Defense would agree with that. But they're powerful, right? They control the budget, they control the money, and offices like OFPP do influence policy, right? So you're working with people on the Hill, you're working on acquisition reform legislation, and you're working on internal policy guidance that does not need congressional approval, that will go right out to the agencies. You have an enormous ability. GSA, because OFPP is such a small office, GSA was in effect our working arm. And so I would basically task GSA to do things, which is truly what's happening today. If you watch what's going on with the FAR overhaul, GSA is doing the legwork, but the direction's coming from OMB. And to the extent they fail to coordinate with OMB, it does have consequences. And sometimes we want to let OMB know what they may not know. And that's very effective. But because OMB and OFPP is so powerful, they really can steer GSA, they can steer DOD even in certain directions. So it was a great opportunity and basically gave me a platform to work from for the last 17 years in the law firm. And I still sort of do the same thing I've always been doing, It's all this policy stuff. So in any event.
Quick question. Considering the amount of influence the office has, how is it that some administrations don't staff that role? How is it that
it's weird. Yeah, what an amazing question. Yeah, isn't that true? I mean, I think it says something about the quality of the career staff there. The career staff generally has been incredibly competent, incredibly professional, incredible in many ways. And so I think they have taken advantage of that and sort of like, well, we got these career people. And at one point in time, I was one of them. It was sort of like, why bother? Why bother going through the Senate confirmation and so forth? But it's not a real good answer to your question, though, because I think it is important to have a political in that position because they sit at the table with all the other politicals at OMB. And if you don't have that political approval, and you're not part of the club, and you just don't carry the same influence that you would if you were a Senate-confirmed political appointee. I think it's a mistake. I think every administration should fill that role or should be depoliticized and just not have. But I don't think that's the right idea either, because again, there's so many political appointees at OMB. You want to be at the table with all the political appointees at OMB. I mean, that's where the influence really is. So I think it's a mistake not to get a Senate-confirmed OFPP administrator.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a big mistake of the Biden administration not to formally – they did nominate Biniam and then withdrew that nomination after a period of time. I'm sure someone who was in legislative affairs at the time could have the backstory about why they didn't put the political capital behind trying to get him confirmed. I think Christine Harada, who was apolitical, who didn't get confirmed, who was leading that office, she did the best she could. She's really smart and great. And Leslie Field, who was my deputy and like Rob acted in the administrative role for a long time, is one of the smartest, best people I ever worked with in government and outside of government. But I will say that there were certain, when policy decisions got pretty contentious, especially when I didn't think that the White House staff who was driving a particular policy that was going to affect procurement was understood all of the unintended consequences, perhaps, of what they were pushing, it would not have been fair to put a career senior executive service member in the position to push back strongly. I got dragged into senior West Wing offices and told, who do you think you are? You're some random dude at OMB who's now stopping what the president wants to do. And I would say, well, yes, he nominated me for this position that I have, and he can fire me tomorrow. That's fine. I think I am serving him. I'm just not doing what you want to do. And I know you outranked me by however many levels. But again, this is my one little job. And here's my data. Here's my fact set. Here's the analysis I performed upon those and the conclusions I drew. Do you have different data? Did you do different analysis? No, you're just pushing the agenda of a particular important, valid, concerned party or group of folks. Well, okay, I'm not going to sign that. And so it's not fair to put a career official in that role. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, cross administration. And so I think that was a mistake. And I'm glad that, Dr. Rhodes is confirmed and doing that job now. And we don't agree on all of the policies, but that's okay and good. But Marcus, that's a great question, because I think that was a big miss. And at times it's just a bit of an oversight, right? You're trying to get all of these political appointees through Senate confirmation, and sometimes it's but there's senior procurement execs and chief acquisition officers at every agency. It'll be fine. And obviously I'm super biased because I worked at the office and I love it, but I think you should have a Senate confirmed OFPP administrator for sure.
By the way, that was fascinating. I haven't heard any of those stories as you and I.
Save them for the Xchange.
No, I love this. Evaluate program effectiveness, coordinate interagency policy, developing management improvements, and reviewing agency legislation and testimony. Those are all four of the functions of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and Office of Management and Budget. The concept of enterprise government. This is not a new feature in government. It's not even a new debate. Rob, you were there for FSSI. Both of you were. I was looking into, here's a fun fact. How many contract vehicles, new vehicles, were awarded when Rob Burton was acting administrator? The answer's zero, which is a good thing, right? In other words, at least what I was looking at when I was looking through this data, when Joe was OFPP administrator, there was one particular agreement that was let out while he was in that position, and it was the early cloud agreements for email as a service. And so some of those strategic sourcing BPAs or strategic sourcing approaches started emerging prior to you getting there, Mr. Burton. I think that was the original concepts.
I think the first memo on strategic sourcing, I think we signed out maybe, I can't remember for sure, 2005, 2007. It was somewhere in that time frame.
Yes, and that was with the Smart Buy. That was the initial Smart Buy program in 2004, I think.
There was actually, that may be true, but there was actually a memo, I think it was actually called strategic sourcing, the actual title of it. Mm-hmm. Now, it might have been 2007. I just can't remember. But the concept of strategic sourcing, then it morphed into category management later. Yep. But the concept of strategic sourcing definitely was 2007 for sure. And there was enormous pushback, right? Enormous pushback. We did get something going with respect to FedEx and UPS having a centralized contracted GSA with respect to those services, right? because everybody used them. They're common goods and services, very, very common. Not many competitors. It was sort of easy to negotiate some type of arrangement in that regard. But enormous pushback at the concept the agencies did not like. And still you get pushback, right? I mean, I think the Trump administration's finding it is harder than they thought it would be because people like to control their own procurement dollars. So I don't want GSA dealing with my procurement dollars, right? There was that general attitude that you cannot have GSA, and that was the idea even back then, was like, well, let's have GSA do some of this purchasing for common goods and services. Not a new idea, but enormous pushback from agencies saying, no, we want to control our own procurement dollars. So it was a control issue, right? Really a control issue. And I think to this day, it's very difficult. But I will say this, that we have never had a president who's issued more executive orders touching upon acquisition. Truly fascinating. Several directly involving acquisition, right? Like the FAR overhaul, which makes the Office of Federal Procurement Policy much more powerful, much more influential, and people are actually hearing that it exists. Because now I think getting a Senate confirmed administrator will be much easier, because I think it will be up on the higher level of the food chain. I think all of a sudden, this administration has actually elevated acquisition to a new height, such that everybody is paying attention to it more than ever, which means the administrator probably will have more influence than ever before, because it is a high priority of the administration. That's not always been true. And really, one of the reasons the administrator has never gotten approved by the Senate is because the administrations just haven't pushed it. It's not a priority position. In the view of many administrations, it's not a priority position. And that was even said to me once, like, well, you can just hang out here and be acting for how long? I mean, it's like, we don't really need an administrator, okay? Really, because they don't view it as that important. But I think that's changed. I think it's been changed dramatically. And because of, I don't know how many, I added them up once, how many executive orders. The president's issued over 200. But it's dozens that touch upon acquisition, and certainly 6 or 7 that are directly related to acquisition. That's unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented.
But talk a little bit more about the assumptions that go around the concept of enterprise government. What is, like, if I was steel manning that argument, it's a common one. The United States government is a Fortune 1 among peers. Therefore, the U.S. government should be treated as a Fortune 1 company and leveraging their Fortune 1 status within the marketplace when it comes to buying and executing on behalf of the American people. I mean, that is essentially what the argument is. We've been hearing that forever.
Sure. And so I helped accelerate the Federal Strategic Sourcing Initiative. We put out a policy memo on that. We created the Strategic Sourcing Leadership Council. And the theory there, and I say it because so much of the language is always the federal government buys X amount of whatever the category is, to your exact point. Now, I think there's truth to that. And I think the government should view itself as an enterprise, not rigidly so, but look for opportunities to leverage its scale and its purchasing power to get a good deal, et cetera. And let me set aside the kind of social policy through procurement part of what OFPP and administrations and many/most of the executive orders Rob referenced are about, right? One team wants businesses to do X, Y, and Z, and they can't legally tell private businesses to hire certain folks or board representation of a certain type or whatever, but they can tell all federal contractors to do that as long as the administrator agrees that it comports with economy and efficiency in the procurement system. And since the vast majority of the Fortune 500 are federal contractors, they then have no choice but to agree. So leaving that part aside and just talking more about getting a better deal, I think there are good arguments for why the government should do more of that. However, the thing that approach always misses is not, the government is not buying all of its laptops at the same time. And so when you start to work in pricing, we need a discount because we're a Fortune 1 enterprise. It's like, well, we're giving you the, if you're the vendor, sure, we'll give you a good price. We think we already are, but, commit to buying X volume. And it doesn't work that way because all the agencies are on different cycles. Some have slightly different needs. Some of those differences in needs are very legitimate. Some are lame. And just because certain CIOs or CTOs want to justify their decision, like Rob said, there's a bit of a control aspect to that. And so it's a very nuanced debate. I purposely moved the discussion further towards an enterprise government approach in strategic sourcing for quote unquote commodity goods and services on purpose, knowing that it would force a lot of that hard discussion and then it would swing back a little bit, which is what it did when my successor, Ann Rung, morphed it from strategic sourcing to category management, right? It's much harder to argue the government shouldn't manage these high spend categories and have a good idea of volumes and pricing and differences in those things versus saying, hey, these are the 50 vendors who are allowed to participate. And that's where, even in category management, that's where the best-in-class contracting vehicles came up. And then there is a fair argument. And so all of these things are more nuanced, but it's hard in this town to have a nuanced conversation where there are going to be winners and losers. We're Boston guys. Mayor Curley once had this great quote about government contracting where he said, I hate government contracting. All you end up with are 9 unhappy people and 1 ungrateful person. And so, that's kind of the way this works. And back to your original point about what's going on now, I love trying to make government operate better. It's not a business. There is no profitability, so that's something that gets lost in the debate. But operate with a more enterprise view as long as these discussions are able to be had and led by, a set of folks or a position that is empowered to facilitate those tough discussions.
Rob, you have anything to add around the enterprise government piece? I mean, I do recall in the early strategic sourcing efforts, small business was apoplectic around some of the categories, less so with the IT piece too, and more so when it came to
I've never gotten more heat in my life than from office supply resellers.
Office supplies, furniture supplies, janitorial, the other categories that were there that oftentimes end up being localized kind of support systems for those regional regional areas. It did kick up quite a bit there.
John, I think we probably need to pivot to what's going on at GSA right now because it's not insignificant. I mean, all of this has led up to the OneGov initiative. And everybody's like, what's it going, people are very confused as to what it is. But I'll tell you right now, it is about consolidation. It is about enterprise-wide contracts. The Trump administration, and I think they were correct, did find that there was inconsistent pricing for software licenses throughout the government. And they were somewhat doing an apples-to-apples comparison. And it was clear that some agencies were paying more for the exact same. It was just a matter of number of seats, how much you're charging for that seat and, the number of seats. But basically, the software license for that seat was different at one agency than another. And the thing that really got this thing going was some cybersecurity concerns where the Trump administration reached out to the OEM or prime contractor and said, hey, we got a problem here with this cyber stuff. And they're like, don't talk to us about it. Talk to our reseller. You've got privity of contractor with the reseller, not us. So we're not talking to you. And that did not go over well with the folks, the new leadership at GSA. And it really then set off this need to have control, consistency on pricing, especially at GSA. And there is now a very strong movement with the administration to have direct contracts with OEMs and not for them to be hiding behind, if you will, the reseller. And the reseller community is really concerned, and rightly so, about where this is all headed. And it's just unclear. The administration, though, has been fairly clear. if you look at some of the public statements they've made with respect to, we are going to have privative contracts with a lot of these major OEMs. And the resellers, they may provide value, we're not sure, but to the extent they want to be subcontractors, maybe they should be subcontractors to the OEM. But the idea of having all of these resellers that we have to negotiate with and deal with when we have a cyber incident and have to deal with about 7 resellers when we could be dealing with 1 OEM, they are very serious about this. And if you look at the restructuring that just occurred at GSA, if you really look at what's going on there, they are saying to the government, to all the federal agencies, we're going to act as one. We're not going to have silos for the GSA schedules and each one of these IDIQ, government GWACs and so forth. All of it's going to come under one umbrella. It is going to be one GSA and no more silos. That is, they are positioning that agency to take on NASA SOUP, to take on some of these government-wide vehicles. The organization of GSA now is structured, whether it's going to work or not, who knows, but it's structured to basically pull in a lot of these government-wide contracts so they're all at GSA. Now, it's not going to be 100%, and it's certainly, this again, Department of Defense, Department of War, it's going to be its own thing. It always will be to a large extent. But with respect to the civilian agencies, I don't think I've ever seen this type of effort. And the question is, will it be successful? And I think what I'm seeing is that agencies are not pushing back like they did 20 years ago with me. I do not see that same type of pushback. There's some, but it's sort of like, well, let's see how it goes. Okay, GSA, let's see how it goes. And what would GSA's response be to that? It's going really well. Their response would be, we have saved hundreds of millions of dollars on these OneGov pricing deals. Granted, some of them are short-term. They'll be renegotiated. But the view is we're getting better pricing from the OEM when we OneGov deals. And that's where they want to go for the future. There's no question about it. And the Department of War is also doing the same thing. They have issued sole source contracts to OEM software providers, cutting out the reseller. And I think this is the beginning of this could be revolutionary. They like that word, revolutionary. And what I'm seeing here is definitely unprecedented. Certainly unprecedented. And guess what? GSA leadership has also said, and this is public, we're not stopping with software licenses. We are going to be moving to hardware, and we're going to be moving into non-IT as well. The goal is all common goods and services at GSA, and they're starting with software licenses. But I think we're going to see much more enterprise-wide contracts at GSA. That got him thinking, didn't it?
No, I just hate disagreeing with you, Rob. I really do. Going back to the question, what is an enterprise? Does enterprise government exist? If it does, in what form? It's not Citibank. It's not one enterprise where everything's the same across. If the government is an enterprise, the most closest association would be Berkshire Hathaway. In other words, OMB or OFPP, they have a little insurance over here. They have some Dairy Queen over here, some McDonald's, some trains, some Apple, some tech stock, this, that, and some furniture, the whole gambit. Berkshire Hathaway doesn't require Dairy Queen to have the same point-of-sale system as McDonald's. Berkshire Hathaway doesn't require that the furniture company is buying paper and common goods and sharing it across. They're overseeing an enterprise of enterprises. And that's actually closer to the truth within the federal government than a single enterprise. It is an enterprise of enterprises. You can't buy common goods between, especially for IT, between, for example, Housing and Urban Development on one hand and the Director of the National Intelligence on the other hand. They have different functions, different missions, different architectures, different everything that's required of it. People may want to view government as an enterprise, but you can also want to look at a ham sandwich and call that a fruit. it doesn't make the ham sandwich a fruit. In other words, just because you call something doesn't make it what it is. You have to describe it in terms of what it actually looks like, how it functions. It doesn't function as an enterprise. It functions as an enterprise of enterprises. So then the question becomes, what do you do then? Because that actually, I think, was when it was most effective under you, was when each agency was treated as, when consolidation was happening under strategic sourcing. And it was happening under strategic sourcing, just not at GSA, but it was happening at the agencies themselves. Department of Homeland Security had a very difficult task associated with all of their different CBP, FEMA, all the way down the line, each of them being their own individual enterprise as well. What we found, and here I'm pointing to a friend who's in the audience who actually led some of these as well, is that the most of the savings happened when we were facilitating information share between agencies, and they were seeing for themselves, oh my goodness, I was paying too much for that. At the time of recompete, we're gonna change how our agreements look, without necessarily trying to capture the entirety of the economy of scale within the U.S. government. Now, how is GSA buying as an enterprise right now? Well, I can make the argument that they are, especially if they're executing the buying functions for the Office of, for OPM, for SBA, for Department of Education. I think they have buying responsibilities under this administration for those groups. Well, okay, now to your point earlier, Joe, now they're writing a check for actual products to be deployed from this building enterprise where they're actually doing that's the point right there. The enterprise is where the money is exchanged, and if the money's being exchanged for enterprise use, then that's what the enterprise is. Otherwise, yeah, we'll see. I mean, I haven't seen the numbers yet. I see the claimings of savings. We claim lots of savings. I'll be interested to look at the numbers at the end of the fiscal year to find out what happened, and to really see whether agencies are taking advantage of these agreements or not.
That's a very important point. Are the agencies going to come? So these OneGov arrangements are not mandatory, and agencies are being encouraged to use them and to use the pricing that was agreed to in those OneGov arrangements. To what extent that's being done is unclear, but guess what? OMB is working right now on a list of required use contract vehicles. This is taking a little bit longer than I thought. We may never see it, but they're working on the idea of actually requiring agencies to use particular contract vehicles. Now, why do I think they may be at GSA? Why do I think that maybe whatever is required, if it does happen, will it be at GSA? My guess is yes. So will we see that? We've always had best in class, we've had preferred, we've never had required usage.
Yes, we did.
Well, generally speaking.
1991 was the last time. It was 1991, 1992. That was Klinger-Cohen. Klinger-Cohen was the thing that reversed the mandatory usage of schedules back in 91. Am I right on that?
You're saying reversed. Didn't you just say reversed?
In other words, schedules was a mandatory vehicle for everybody to buy prior to Klinger-Cohen. Everyone had to use those particular mentions.
You're going back really far now. But I mean,
No.
I'm talking about right now.
Okay.
Right now, right? Agencies are not required to use any vehicles, and schedules are not required. They're definitely looking to change that. I don't know what's going to be on the list, or if there ever is going to be a list, but But regardless of whether OMB comes out with a list of required used vehicles, there is pressure on the agencies to use these GSA vehicles and the OneGov arrangements. And the idea let's just stick with software because that's where the emphasis is right now. The idea is an agency would use the OneGov pricing that was agreed to with GSA, and then they would hire integrators. They would hire software integrators to add the services, and that would be negotiable with the agency. The agency would then negotiate with the integrators for the add-on services, if you will. But that the baseline price for the software licenses themselves would be the GSA price. That's the goal. I mean, that's the objective. Whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not hundreds of millions of dollars will be saved, GSA says they have already, saved hundreds of millions of dollars. That remains to be seen. But I think it's important to understand where the administration's headed and what the objective is.
Any other additions on that one, Joe? Because we could slide into commodity and commodity purchasing and commodity IT, but I think that's the other side of these one grubs agreements. The days of people say, I want to buy my IT like I buy my pens. Well, okay. The big difference is that you can't configure that. All IT, just about all IT is configurable. Am I right on that? Look at Jack on that. Just about all IT is configurable. There's no such, is commodity IT a fallacy?
I don't think it's a fallacy. I think it's like anything in purchasing, and I use air quotes, commodity goods or services. It's all about how you define the technical specifications and the requirements. So, if I say, hey, I want to buy 1,000 sedans and everyone bids, it's like the low price person is going to be someone that's got no doors, you didn't say any of that. So, but if I'm like, I want to buy a 2026 Jeep Cherokee with these exact specs from the thing, well, then there are 13 dealers in the greater DMV area who will bid based on inventory if you're writing that check today. So it's all about defining the technical specifications and getting agreement on terms and conditions. Those are all good things you can do in advance and have good discussion about, and it's worth the prep work. Pricing doesn't matter until you're bringing dollars to the table. So, when GSA talks about savings, like, I can't help but laugh because GSA scheduled pricing's a joke. It is deemed fair and reasonable because someone in GSA said, okay, your list price is fair and reasonable. And there's very little, especially in services, very little debate and understanding about relative value between service providers who provide what is viewed as the same service, management consulting, for example, and things like that. And then to be FAR compliant, you get 3 bids and you're good to go. Like, that's a joke. You should say, okay, now I'm buying these. Now run add price into the competition among a broad swath of vendors who have already signed up to a whole bunch of terms and conditions, been audited for whatever, compliance, cyber, all these other things, and meet the technical specifications of whatever good or service you're buying. And I think it's fine in IT hardware and it's fine in software. And I think resellers provide a valuable service as well, but it all depends. And so, like, the all or nothing debate is where these things always fall off the rails. And, if you said, Joe, if this was more consolidated, where should it live? I'd say, well, probably GSA, but like, GSA has certainly not earned the right to own it. And
could be at OFPP, could be OMB.
We have like 25 people. I think that would be a stretch. And like Rob said, whenever we needed to get anything real done, it was in partnership with the thousands of people at the Federal Acquisition Service. But that's the hard thing. And so mandates is what it might come to, because that's the only way the agencies will listen. Or you strip them of their buying function, like the current administration did with some of the agencies you mentioned and gave the buyers to GSA. But neither of those are sustainable because the next administration will just undo it. And so you have to, with data and analytics, prove that what you're doing is the right way to do it. And there'll always be winners or losers, so you're never going to get everybody to agree. But I think there are ways to move towards an enterprise view without treating government like Citigroup, where everyone's standardized on one laptop and one tech stack and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Let's go on. Yeah, let's hit some questions from our audience.
Yeah, so really glad to have an attorney in here in the conversation here. I'm Jack. I'm former GS14, former federal system integrator, and been in industry for the biggest technology companies that are out there. I think this comes down to what the definition of an enterprise is. And there's two different plays here. One is the government wants the benefits of being an enterprise, and then they want to do a base plus option years, which is not an enterprise play, because all of the risk is on industry at that point. We can go cut contracts for this building lease for 20 years, and we can make it so that if you back out of that lease, there's a huge penalty for that. That's very hard. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to do in the government. On the other side, the enterprise is not a singular entity. Any of those names, those brands that you've named, they're not one company. For instance, the largest computer company in the world, their salespeople are under such and such, let's call it Acme, so I don't have to mention they're from my former employer too, such and such marketing company. Their marketing. The services side is based out of India, or now it's been sold, but at the time it went up through India and then rolled up to the owner that everybody would know. And then the manufacturing was somewhere else, right? So actually for the attorney side, I would be asking, do you not think that this is a fool's errand, because the organizations are going to, instead of it being a reseller, they're going to either spin up internal legal entities that just put the layers and consolidate that into, kind of a monopoly, things that we wouldn't allow in the film industry, with theaters and films and all that. All of a sudden we create that. The government actually creates that in there. So an enterprise, you got to first work on what you're talking about, what the definition of an enterprise is, and does the government really want that? So enterprise does not equal enterprise. And on the OneGov, almost the $1 deals that you see, $1 for all this AI, those folks are making money in other industries and they subsidize that. It's not a sustainable model. And I would argue it's not in the favor of the government to go after those kind of models, because you're basically stripping out the entrepreneurial side of our world, and you're going to consolidate into people that at some point they're not going to do the things that you want them to do, because they're going to be more powerful than you, bigger than you, even as the government, when the next leader is not as strong, opinionated on the other thing. I'm just stirring that. I wanted to get your opinion about the layers of commercial structures, and if that would actually be changing anything.
So yeah, let's see, going directly really to what you're talking about. The OEMs clearly have valued IT VARs in the past, right? They play an enormously critical role. These OEMs are big commercial companies that many of them, the federal government is just a minor part of their business. Everybody thinks, oh, you can't, we're the federal government, you got to have the federal government. No, not really. Some of these major companies don't need the federal government and have used and don't want to deal with the federal government, don't want to deal with all this compliance requirements and so forth. And that's why the IT bars were invented, and that's why they do an incredible job, generally speaking. If in fact the OEMs did what the administration wants, they would set up a subsidiary. They would actually have to create all of this compliance infrastructure and so forth. It would be costly. And the point I have always made is that if you force OEMs to do this, I'm not sure you will successfully force them or not, but to the extent, let's say you were to force them to become direct partners with the United States government, the costs will definitely go up. What is concerning here, which is I think my argument's valid. However, we have sole source JNAs at the Department of War that have been issued to major OEMs, and I'm just guessing that the JNAs were drafted by the OEMs, even though they're signed by the government official. They're amazing. And they're basically saying, okay, we can do what the reseller does. We can do it, and we can do it better, and we can do it cheaper. The fact that this type of, and I'm not really paraphrasing by that much, the fact that any OEM is on record making that statement, I'm shocked. I'm like, really? Is that really true?
It means one of two things. It means you've either been, either for all of these years, you've been overcharging as a result of inefficiencies when you knew you could give the government something better and less expensively, which I doubt that to be the case.
Yeah, it's very, and maybe the OEM didn't write it. Maybe the government wrote it. I'm making
No, I read 3 of those justifications. There was an article that I just put out recently, and it wasn't even one of my more punchy ones. Yeah, but No, there's no doubt in my mind that was written by OEMs because the claims being made were unsubstantiated. There's a way that claim could be made, or I should say, there's a way to test the validity of some of those arguments out, which would have been to compete the agreement. Okay, why don't you, the OEM, also compete against your resellers for the same work?
That's the other thing. These are sole source. Some of these are 10-year contracts, mind you.
Right.
10-year contracts, sole source. I mean, right there's a rate. Why is the government doing that? Why is the government doing that? I've really been struck by some of the things I'm seeing here, and you just don't know what the end is. Just don't know where we're going to end up with all of this. Mm-hmm. But it definitely has the reseller community, and not just IT, the reseller community at large, which are incredibly competent with respect to dealing with the federal government. They know how to deal with the federal government. The federal government is not a commercial entity. It will never be a commercial entity. And
Well, it's a monopoly. The U.S. citizen doesn't have two places to pay federal income tax, usually. I mean, they have one. I mean, we don't get to go and choose who our federal government is. It's a monopoly, right? I love my monopoly, but it is a monopoly, right? And so it's different than enterprise. So if XYZ Acme Computer Company only had, they were the only game in town, I think their behavior would probably change. Right?
Right about the definition of enterprise. I mean, this does come down to what is an enterprise, right? And I think the government has a different definition than the commercial sector has. I think their definitions are different.
That was kind of my point. And on the fun side, John, if I ever do make the stage, I want my bumper music to be saliva, click, click, boom. I'm just saying. So.
Okay. Yeah, I had. Yeah. All right. Ladies and Gentlemen is one of my favorite tunes too. I've had that up there.
Yeah. It's all good.
Extra drink later on me if you can guess what each of their walk-up songs were going to be as we came up there. I think one's might be easier than the other. Marcus, do we have more questions? Let's we've been going at this for an hour.
I think one of the ones I have here is we mentioned the Revolutionary Fire overhaul, and I was going to ask around what have those impacts? Are we seeing those impacts yet, or is it still?
How revolutionary is it? I've been hearing
so far,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's something I've been hearing recently from folks wondering. Okay, so they took out what was extra legislatively, right? Whatever wasn't required, but non-statutory. Thank you, Joe. That's what you can tell. You went to law school and I didn't. No,
I did sleep at the Holiday Inn Express last night.
So they stripped that back, but it also looks like they just took out what was originally there and placed it into some guides instead. I mean,
yes.
How revolutionary is this? I mean, I do think it was one of the main early victories that this administration was able to push through. I think OMB and GSA and others did the job they were asked to do, which was to go to their legislative core, their statutory core, and strip everything else out. What do you guys? Is it revolutionary or
no? It'll change some things around the margins. Largely, again, more social policy than anything else. The way small businesses are utilized, things like that. But no, because everybody is, I hate regulation. And then I'm like, all right. When I say, I don't mean in D.C. even. If I ask my aunt, like, hey, you've complained multiple times about government regulations. Like, what is a regulation? And they're like, it's it's all the burden they put on us. Like, no, that is an effect perhaps. But the Congress passes a statute that says the Safe Conference Room Chair Act of 2026, and all conference room chairs are going to be safe because there was a big accident and a bunch of people got hurt in unsafe chairs. Okay, agencies, like, now define for industry what is a safe chair. And over time, people keep figuring out, like, well, if we don't add this sentence or paragraph in, we've left ourselves in a vulnerability. And that's what happened with the federal acquisition regulation. It's like, all right, we all want the highest quality goods and services at the lowest possible price. Then there's some other kind of social policy things in there. Don't buy from these people, do buy from them. And over time, it's like, yeah, but here's how you do that. And through regulation and, yes, executive order, language gets put in there to further explain what do we mean here. And you can take some of that out. I did that. You can add some things in, like, I pushed to have small business set-asides in Part 8 to make sure they weren't in there. And GSA is like, we don't have to do it. I'm like, cool, I'm the chair of the FAR Council. We're putting that in there. And so, there are things like that. But this was an effort to say, okay, we're taking all those things that aren't explicitly dictated by active law and taking them out because it's just too much, because stupid Democrats and their overregulation. And then they realized there is absolutely no way you're going to be able to use the FAR then. So they added all that stuff back into practitioner guides that sit right next to it. So the FAR is revolutionarily overhauled by making half the book in the book and half the book right next to it in the companion guide. So whatever. And again, in doing those two things, it took out a few things they don't like, many of which I think were wrong to do, but those will all get undone sometime between next January when Congress flips or the year after, the 2 years after if the White House flips.
Okay, so I basically agree with Joe, except it's too early to tell. It's too early to tell, and here's why. So let's, again, I'll give you the GSA point of view on this. They say, now they got to get their numbers straight. They're giving different numbers, all right? But well over 1,000, and some people at GSA will say 3,000, mandatory directive language, i.e. shall or must, has been removed from the FAR either entirely or it's been changed to you should do this, and it's been put in the FAR companion. They would argue. Now, the thing is, I don't know what those 3,000, let's go with 3,000. I don't know what those 3,000 things say. Somebody at some point is going to have to go through and try to figure out what was the must or the shall language that was actually either totally removed or put in the FAR companion. I mean, was it of any significance? Was it 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, however many? Is it really just who cares? Or was it substantial? So far, nobody's really identified anything that's earth-shattering in that regard. What I think is important is that this FAR companion, keep your eye on it. It's a moving ball, right? This FAR companion starts out, first version, 52 pages. Second version, 120 pages. We're promised more versions this year. Why do I think there will be additional pages? If you look at the index of the FAR companion, what is it? It's the FAR. It's the exact same index as the FAR. But how does it start off? It starts off, and I'm paraphrasing, hey, you attorneys, don't you even think about using anything in this FAR companion for purposes of litigation. This is just recommendations, best practices. Nothing in here is mandatory. It's non-regulatory. We're not going to go out for public comment. And so how it grows in the future and how much stuff gets in the FAR companion in the future that probably should go out for public comment, that could be revolutionary. They have created a structure that gives them the opportunity to basically avoid the rulemaking process. And to the extent they put stuff in the FAR companion in the future, that one will argue, that's not, I mean, that should be regulatory. You should go out for a public comment. I mean, what are you doing there? Even though they may not use the word shall, it will be viewed as directive in nature. Strongly recommended. I think that's what they're doing. What they're doing is trying to create a structure in the future to avoid the rulemaking process. They find the rulemaking process, and it is cumbersome, it's long, it takes forever, and they don't like it. This FAR companion is not getting much attention. The practitioner guides as well, but the FAR companion is the future. That is going to be the new FAR. And so I think it could be revolutionary. There are revolutionary aspects. For example, we have never in the history of federal procurement used class deviations the way they use class deviations. To set up the new FAR structure, they use class deviations that have never been used this way before, and massive use of class deviations to in effect, change the FAR as fast as possible. Now what are you going to see in 2026? You're going to see the formal rulemaking process begin, but most agencies have now adopted the deviations, and guess what? It's already in place. It's already being utilized vis-a-vis the deviations, but we got to do rulemaking, right? And so now we're going to start the rulemaking process very shortly. I believe you'll see the first batch of rules come out for public comment. And guess what? Only 30 days. That's what the minimum amount of time required for comment. You're only going to see 30 days. They're on the fast track. They want this regulatory process done by the end of the year. I don't know if they'll make that or not, but that's the goal. So revolutionary. What is the definition of revolutionary? There certainly have been dramatic changes that the impact of which I don't think we can really evaluate at this point in time. Offhand, I don't see anything revolutionary except the structure. The structure has the potential for being revolutionary in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. All that. I would say so 3 quick things. One, I'm very sympathetic to the frustration with the rulemaking process and changing the FAR. When I got into OFPP in 2011-12, there were still 6 references to Y2K in the FAR. So I was like, all right, I studied up on the FAR for this new job I got. Like, this is really dumb. Can we take those out? And they're like, of course. And I'm like, all right, so just take them, like, do we just update it online? How does this work? They're like, no, it's 53 weeks. That's the fast track to change something. I'm like, to remove a reference to something that's 13 years old or 12 years old, it takes 53 weeks. So yeah, absurd, and I understand maybe they swung the pendulum too far ignoring the rulemaking process, but I do understand that frustration. Second, there could be some positive benefits from the RFO. Namely, you see right now Congress is debating putting the rule of 2 in statute, which is that if a contracting officer reasonably expects to receive 2 or more qualified bids from small businesses, he or she shall set it aside for small businesses. That's never been in statute. It's just in regulation. So Congress like, whoop, well, if they're going to take this stuff out, like they didn't take it out, but if they can take it out, great, we're going to put it in statute. So maybe some stuff like that happens. That could be cool. Great. Maybe Congress can get back involved. And then third, if they really want to do something revolutionary, it would be to focus on, in part 1, you don't have to read the other 52 parts. In part 1, it says, if you want to do something and it's not expressly forbidden in this book and it comports with sound business judgment, you can do it. That is how very few contracting officers who I met approach their jobs. So if you reinforce, train, support, or promote that attitude among the contracting officer workforce, then I'm great with what's in a companion guide versus the FAR.
Putting on your old former hats, when trying to determine a price and whether a price and savings for the American people is appropriate, is competition expected, and is competition where the best price is found?
It's the best and easiest way, to put it out there for sure. There isn't always the possibility of competition. Maybe something's one of a kind, first of a kind. Maybe it's provided by a single source. Maybe you've got a legacy vendor and the switching costs are very high, all those sorts of things. But absolutely, I agree with so much of the Competition and Contracting Act, with all the spirit and very much of the language. And yes, over time, there were reasons to go in other directions, and that requires the vendor partner sharing data. Level 3 real pricing data is very hard to get to. That was the hardest part of a strategic sourcing effort. You know that, hey, agency X is paying $3,000 for their laptops, and agency Y also uses the same vendor XYZ laptop, and they're paying $2,000. Man, they're getting, the first agency is getting ripped off. It's like, well, no, because if you look at the line items, theirs has all these peripherals, theirs doesn't. Theirs has these services, theirs doesn't. And so it's very hard to get at that information. Competition is the easiest way to suss that out. But a robust competition typically runs counter to speed, and everybody wants speed and pult time low and those sorts of things. And so there are other ways you can address that, but I agree that is the best and easiest and most transparent.
Yeah, it's a really good point Jordan makes is the administration, right, they want competition because they do believe that it gets you a fair and reasonable price by definition. And generally, that's one of our pillars of the acquisition system. We've always said that. Competition is one of the pillars of the acquisition system, and the idea is that it will bring fair and reasonable pricing. Yet, the administration likes speed. The way to do the fast procurement is to award sole source to an Alaskan Native or an American Indian tribe, because you also then protect against a protest. You will not have a protest, and the administration doesn't like protests. So if you want speed, no protests, you're going to go with sole source. If you want fair and reasonable pricing, you probably will go competition. However, what did you just see the president issue? An executive order on fixed price contracts. So to address what I just said, I think the response of the administration is we are going to have fixed price contracts, which puts the risk on contractors, and the view that well, just that. We want the risk to be on contractors, and the idea of increased costs with the risk being with the contractor. 43% of our procurements in the federal government are sole source or one bidder. 43%. That is striking, isn't it? Striking. And so that sort of goes against this whole idea, well, competition is really great and it gets very reasonable pricing. And yet I think speed is very important too, just like Joe was saying. And in order to get that, you're going to do sole source. And so you have a real tension here between some of the overriding objectives of our procurement system, competition versus speed. Both are high priorities of this administration. Both are not necessarily consistent. And so I think it's a real challenge. And I think this executive order on fixed price, that could be revolutionary, because if you look at what that requires, it's going to have a chilling effect on cost reimbursable contracting or T&M contracting, because, and don't miss that one paragraph, any non-fixed price contract in the future, you will have to alert the head of agency. You, the contracting officer, will have to inform and alert the head of agency that you're planning to go with a non-fixed price contract. Do I want to do that if I'm a contracting officer? Are you kidding me? And if it's over a certain threshold, and I can't remember the thresholds, but they're different thresholds. If it's over a certain threshold, the head of agency has to respond in writing with an approval. The head of agency will then actually have to approve. But this provision to notify head of agency, I think is going to have an enormous chilling effect on the future of cost reimbursable contracting in the federal government, at least short term.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Next question. A little hard, but in my mind, you don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
My favorite kind.
On the small business side, there's a lot of talk.
I love them. They're great.
There's a lot of talk right now around, possible roll of two. SDVOSB has been pretty clear. Other socioeconomic classes have taken some heat over. There's a lot of questions as to whether they'll be maintained. Woman-owned small business, 8A. Where's that coming from? Is this the appropriate place to talk about that? And I guess my question is, what? I don't know what to believe there, because from my own perspective, yeah, some things weren't used properly. But when I talk about Alaska Native owned, I wonder if they're getting the best price there either. There's different places where they're poking at and saying, hey, you know what? We really got to look at the prices and this seems fixed. Now, we're going to let that set aside group over there alone. We're not going to worry about that because we got speed over there. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out, where are they going? What are they trying to do here?
Have you ever heard the president speak about minorities or women? It's not that confusing where this is coming from. It's very overtly and publicly anti-DEI. And so this administration picks winners or losers. When I was at the SBA and running all of those set-aside programs, we made clear and changed the regulations to put all those programs in parity with each other. So you have to, each agency, the federal government overall is held to a 23% of contracting dollars goal going to small business, and then it's 5% for small disadvantaged businesses, 5% for women-owned small businesses, 3% for service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and 3% for historically underutilized business-owned certified businesses. And VA has another one for just veteran-owned small businesses. The Biden administration did start some of this by tripling the small disadvantaged business goal to 15%, because they wanted to increase contracting dollars going to minority-owned firms, and you can't do that. And the 8A program is not just for minority-owned firms. It is for business. You're eligible if you're a business owner who is socially and economically disadvantaged. And so, but that was the closest analog they saw, and so they said, we're going to triple this goal through executive order. Well, what they may have thought was a door that only swung one way can also be, like anything, like A76 that we both lived through, turns into a saloon door when another team comes in. And now they said, not only are we putting that down to 5%, we don't want you to use it. And since last August, the Small Business Administration has not certified a single firm into the 8A program, has not approved a single application, including Native 8A, which is a totally different part of the program and governed by different statutes and nation-to-nation tribal agreements, whether it be Alaskan Natives, Native Hawaiian organizations, or American Indian tribes. And so they've made clear and when you ask my successor, Ryan Lambert, who I've met and seems like a very, very nice guy, hey, when are you going to do this? He'll say, well, first we have to get rid of the fraud, waste, and abuse that the Biden administration has program. Like, okay, well, nobody's pointed out any of that, and you've had a long time, so now are you going to approve things? And there is clearly no answer, and there have been letters and congressional letters and all that. So, yes, they can't just get rid of them. They're in the law. But, we have learned over the last 15 months that a whole bunch of things that we thought you couldn't do turns out to be norms and not law, or at least not settled law. And so that's how they're baby. That being said, look at the SDVOSB numbers. They're not better. A lot of what Elon and his Doge chaos monkeys did was just cause disruption and break a bunch of these processes. And so it's been bad for all small businesses. But how it shakes out over the next year or two is a very interesting, open question that I don't think anybody can answer with any kind of definite viewpoint.
You didn't want to follow that one up, Rob? I didn't want to follow that one up either.
I'll take the hard ones. I'm fine with that.
So I do want to respond a little bit to the fraud thing. Just this is a factoid. You'll get this. Dr. Mark Haskell, who is the lead investigator of the SNAP program, did a presentation. I think John saw this during COVID. The fraud from COVID was $1.6 trillion. That's twice what the DoD budget was. Currently, his ongoing fraud amount, $20 billion. Now, USDA can buy a lot of technology for $20 billion if they would focus on the fraud kind of piece. So I'm kind of torn on that one. I think if they would, I think my struggle is why it's so hard for technology companies that do amazing things for the government, for them to justify getting a little bit of money, and why they're being squeezed and shaved down to, why is it LPTA and not lowest price, technically superior, not squeezing every drop of blood out, actually making it a healthy industry. Those are things that, especially in the context of the fraud that we've seen lately, maybe that's the better place to look. I don't know. Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? Because I just checked the time and it flew by. It's already 5:20. We've been at this for an hour and 20 minutes, fellas. So we're good with the large studio audience? Yeah? Okay. Joe Jordan, thank you so much for coming down and doing this with me.
Thanks for having me.
And Rob Burton, you are a friend, and I couldn't be more appreciative of you either. I want to get more of you former OFPP administrators together over the course of time, because I value the office. I value the work that you did while you were there.
You're quite a historian. You're the only one that's put a history together. I read that your history too, by the way. It's very interesting.
I did too.
Very accurate, and it's nice to have somebody that really cares about that office.
Yeah,
we appreciate it.
I was reading over. I'm going to do some rewriting because some of the stuff I put out there was a little sharp. So it's over the course of summer. I'm going to be revisiting that because I think the world of both of you. I think the world of OFPP, and I think the world of OMB.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys, and thank you.
Thank you.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?